so easy now. I'll be the first to admit I have no idea what hardship is because
the U.S. of A. do more for people that come out of hardship from a different place than the people that's in the hardship in their own country.
America, although it was discovered by Christopher Columbus, the first settlement of people was Steve. What is an example of a case where it was hard to achieve the American dream? Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to Dream Life Podcast. My name is Steve Buck, and I am your host, and I have my good friend and co-host with me, and he is Gabie. I want to start off, as I normally do, reviewing our last episode. On the last episode, we covered cultivating a strong work ethic, because that is a significant part of the path that we need to be on to achieve any level of success whatsoever. So we talked about, number one, what a strong work ethic is. Everybody needs to know what a strong work ethic is.
Right.
A lot of people think they know what a strong work ethic is, and they have no idea. And if they don't know what it is, come watch my concrete crew carry Simon formed around the job site. Preparation, having yourself prepared mentally, physically, hygienically, everything. Be prepared. Prepare yourself to be successful. We talked about the fact that if you have a job, if you're working for somebody, show up earlier than everybody else, stay later than everybody else.
Right.
Okay?
Be a DJ.
There you go. There before and thereafter.
Right.
We talked about the fact that being successful is much, much more harder than being a loser. And therefore, success, achievement, and living the American dream, it's going to be extremely hard. And you need to know that going in. And if you're okay with hard and working hard and making it happen, then you will live the American dream.
Right.
Okay? Because that's why we're here, to live the dream. Successful people with a strong work ethic, they probably get done 5 times as much stuff as people who are losers, slackers,
right,
mediocre.
Couch potatoes,
okay? Yeah. Because they're always chopping. They're always chopping away at that tree. Chop, 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 chop,
right.
chop. They don't stop chopping, and they chop 5 times as many times as the people who, the couch potatoes and those people who aren't successful, and they're content with mediocrity.
Right.
We also talked about the fact that nobody's born with a strong work ethic.
Right.
A strong work ethic is something that, number one, you understand that you have to be successful. And number two, you go and you attain it.
Right. It's a practice thing.
Right. You have to want it yourself. You have to practice it yourself. And in order for you to own a good work ethic, you have to work very hard at it. And nobody's going to give it to you. It's up to you to go out and think like you work hard, work like you work hard, and you'll know that you got a good work ethic when you're getting 5 times as much done as everybody else around you.
Right. And you at the same time, you're in tune to the competitive rate of how things are going. I mean, which is why sports is good at a young age. Sports and different things like that, because you get a chance to see what some of those work ethics are in people that do things that they love.
That's right. And that strong work ethic, it applies to everything in life. It doesn't matter if it's sports or if it's studying in school or getting some physical work done or getting some computer work done or getting some thoughtful work done. That work ethic is going to help in all of those arenas, and it's going to help make you a person who's more successful, period. So that's a recap of episode 11. Before we get into our new episode, what I wanted to do was just let people know our link to our website is there, how to contact us, our email. If you like what we're doing and you want to help us out, reach out to us and help us do what we're trying to do. Because like I said, one of the things we want to get going this year is the knowledge centers.
Yes.
That's the first thing. And, so we're going to need stuff for the knowledge centers. All right. So digging into episode number 12, there have been a few questions that have been coming up in our email. And so I said, well, this might be a good time for us to just take a short pause, look at the questions, what type of questions, what things are
people having an interest in,
What do they have an interest in and kind of what's going on in their mind? Right off the bat, I got a great question. And I actually had to sit there and ponder how I was going to answer the question because I wasn't expecting
right
to get
that early substantial.
Right. So here's the question. The question is, Steve, what is an example of a case where it was hard to achieve the American dream? And I thought about it. Obviously, I think in my case, it was hard to achieve the American dream. But the way that this question was framed is basically saying, what's the hardest case of people who are trying to live the American dream?
Right.
What's the hardest one that I could think of? And mine isn't the hardest case.
Right.
Because there have been people who have had a lot harder than I have.
Right. A lot worse.
Than the American dream or achieving the American dream. So I thought about it for a while, and I couldn't help but fall back to the Pilgrims.
Oh, right.
The Pilgrims, who were Puritans, they were part of the Puritan sect, religious sect, England. Okay. In all my life, I've never heard a more difficult, downtrodden pathway to live the American dream. And so I said, you know what? That is a great example that we need to share the true story of the Pilgrims with our audience so that our audience understands what it took for the Pilgrims to actually come to this country and begin. It's the start of the American dream.
Right.
I'm going to give a Reader's Digest version of my understanding of the American dream. We're going to intertwine with that some shots from Kirk Cameron's movie called Monumental. It's a documentary about the Pilgrims. Just to share with you kind of that Reader's Digest version. There was a pastor, and I think it was a congregation of about 250 people over in England, who they wanted to serve God and worship God the way that they read in the new found English translation of the Bible. Because in the Church of England, you would have all these bishops and these priests and all these people, you know, they'd stand up there in their fancy robes and everything. They'd deliver to you, you know, the Word of God the way that they wanted to deliver you the Word of God, the way that they interpreted and they read it. Right around that time frame, just before that, the church, and I don't know exactly what group it was, but they translated from the Greek and the Hebrew, they translated the Bible into English. So now you had this brand new translation of the Bible where instead of having to have priests and bishops and all these religious type people tell you what the Word of God says, now you could read it for yourself. What happened was the truth of the Word of God sprung forth into these people's hearts, and so the Puritan church and movement was born out of that scenario where the Bible had just been translated into English. People learned how to become true Christians. They learned how to truly serve God, how God wanted to be served, how God wanted to be worshiped. And so what happened was they began to make laws, where it was considered treason, high treason, for you to leave the Church of England, and get out of their system of control. Lockdown. Well, that's basically what it was. And so the sect of Puritans, they wanted to go to this new land that they heard was discovered to the west of England across the Atlantic Ocean. And so they began to devise plans to make the trip. So on their way out the door, though, they got caught and they were thrown into prison, you know, beaten, put in solitary confinement, all kinds of different things.
By the leaders of the churches?
Yeah, not only the leaders of the church, but the actual parishioners of that church. They were thrown into jail, and it was considered treason to leave the Church of England because that was their control system over the people of faith. So I think everybody needs to know and understand that America, although it was discovered by Christopher Columbus, the first settlement of people was the Pilgrims who landed at Plymouth Rock. And on their way out of England, they ended up having to stop in Holland because they had a treacherous boat ride, you know, between England and Holland. And then from Holland, they ended up going to the United States of America. Once they got to America, out of the 102 people out of the congregation that made it on board the Mayflower, only 47 survived that first winter. Between the trip over and the first winter, only 47 out of 102 people even survived.
That's terrible.
It's very terrible.
Some got thrown off board, some got...
Well, as a matter of fact, that winter that first winter was so bad, the captain of the ship told everybody, all 47 people who survived, he said, if everybody gets on the boat, we can go back to England and we can be there within 3 weeks. Do you know how many people got on that boat?
Zero.
Why? Why?
More than half the people died on the way.
They did not care how hard life was. They wanted to worship God in freedom and liberty.
And not in treason.
Right. And they knew by God's law, it wasn't treason to leave the Church of England.
Right.
Okay. But that's the tyranny, okay, that man will put upon man.
Right.
If he lets them. That's the Reader's Digest version. What I want to do right now is I'm going to take us into the documentary talking about the Pilgrims, and I'm going to move along through different sections, but just to kind of hear the story firsthand, because Kirk does a really good job of putting it together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in the movie. I'm going to let our audience actually see parts and pieces of the movie, and hopefully they'll go in and actually watch the movie so that they can see how difficult and how hard it was for the first people to live the American dream. So without any further ado, here we go. Monumental, the documentary by Kirk Cameron.
They had to have been looking over their shoulders, knowing that at any moment the door could burst open and the army comes in and hauls you off to prison, leaving your children and your wife destitute without anything. They knew that it brought them to a place where they had to make a choice. They said, either we're all in and we're going to get caught eventually here, or we're going to make an escape, a strategic retreat out of England where we can continue to grow and develop as a community of faith, and one day come back to England to set our friends, family, the church, and the entire nation free from this tyrant.
Gabie, I just wanted to stop right there and just put in the comment. I wanted people to see how persecuted that the Puritans were in England during this time frame, because they wanted to be free. And this was religious freedom. Well, this wasn't about anything else except for religious freedom. Our nation was founded by pilgrims who settled at Plymouth, the first encampment, because of the fact that they wanted to be able to live, serve, and worship God the way that they saw fit. So that's item number one that people need to understand, okay? And as this goes on, you'll see further what they had to endure. Here we go.
The Pilgrims made a secret negotiation with a Dutch sea captain who was to come and pick them up on the shores of England in the middle of the night in his boat and secretly take them across the water to Holland.
Our separatists have been walking from Scrooby 60 miles overland. It's September, it's cold. They're camping out, no tents, no sleeping bags. They're not even lighting a fire because the searchers might already be looking for them. Windy, cold, probably wet, when they suddenly see out this very flat landscape, a ship looming out. This ship that's going to take them to freedom.
Unfortunately, the sea captain was also double-dealing. He had made another agreement with the local authorities to capture the separatists and hand them over to them. And the deal was, if he would give them the Pilgrims, the captain could keep all of their money. Well, the Pilgrims had already sold everything that they had up until that point. They had no job, they sold their houses, they sold their lands, no money. Anything that they had left, some of the women had these things hiding under their dresses. So the army comes and captures them, strips them down, takes everything that they have, and throws them into jail.
Okay, so I just wanted to stop there, just a comment. These pilgrims, they lost everything. Terrible. They lost everything to live a dream, I can't call it the American dream because it wasn't called America then.
Yeah, right.
But they lost it all. And they said, we're going to give it all up because we want freedom, we want liberty. I submit to you that the greatest part of the American dream is freedom and liberty. The prosperity part is nice. But when we think about living the American dream, let's first remember that it's the freedom, it's the liberty, it's the ability to live and serve God the way that we see fit, and not having some king of England tell me how to do it,
right?
Or bishops and people in long robes and
or
stuff.
Or be punished if you get it wrong or alter it.
Right, or be wrongfully punished, okay? Right. That's the essence of the American dream. The first part of the American dream is the freedom and the liberty. I just want to point that out so that when people hear what I'm calling the American dream, my American dream starts with freedom and liberty.
I noticed they was getting double dealed all over the whole process.
Exactly.
And so
exactly.
Terrible thing for freedom.
And here we go.
Yeah, this was a huge failure. They had this great plan. Now we're going to get on a boat and go to a new land, but we get caught. Our Bibles are taken away from us. We're thrown into prison, puts our wives and kids in jeopardy, but they don't stop. They don't see that as a closed door. They see that as just they see those as battle wounds and scars and lessons that God is teaching them to prepare them for the next mission. What is the rocket fuel that pushes them to say failure is not final? They're not going, man, this stinks. They're saying, what's next? And they plan their next escape. Not out of fear, but with excitement and passion and enthusiasm, because they know that God has commissioned them and sent them on an assignment. They planned their next escape, and this time it was potentially even more dangerous. The first time they went together on this boat, but the men knew that they were now being watched.
Okay, I just want to stop and comment, okay? You see there that this just put rocket fuel in their rocket.
Right.
They didn't see this as failure. They just say, what's next? What's the next thing that we have to overcome in order to live our dream? Okay?
It's a positive attitude.
They did not quit. And it gets harder. Here we go.
So the husbands separated themselves from their wives and children. They hired another sea captain to meet them in the river, to take them to Holland. But they sent their wives and children on ahead by putting them on a little raft and floating them down a stream in hopes of meeting them as they came out of the woods in the middle of the night to link back up at the boat, knowing that they may never see them again in this lifetime. I mean, that blows my mind to think of saying to my wife, Chelsea, you're gonna be fine. God's gonna work this together for our good. James, Jack, Luke, guys, if I don't see you again in this life, you remember everything I taught you. You take care of your mom, you take care of your sisters. These guys were all in.
The problem was the women got here a day early and consequently were very seasick. So they came into the shore where it was, less movement. And the problem was they got caught right there on a mud bank. Horrors of horrors. Armed men closing in on the women. The women are helpless. They can't get out of the craft. It's stuck on the mud. They're sitting ducks. The men can't do anything. The women have got all the belongings, all the money. And the captain, when he sees the position, now this was dangerous because if he was caught, they'd take his ship from him. That's his living. So he cries an oath, Sacramente, and he goes. And once that Dutch ship hit the North Sea, the mother of all storms blew up. And the men were just carried off towards Norway. 2 weeks that storm blew. 2 weeks. They couldn't control the ship, so they just put themselves below deck and they just had to let it ride out the storm. It must have been terrifying. Bradford said, you know, for days on end, they didn't see the sun, the moon, the sky, and they really thought they were going to die. And at one point, when they really thought the end was near, our separatists prayed in earnest. They prayed and they said, even now, Lord, even now, you could save us. And the storm abated. They got control of the ship and turned about and made their way to Holland, to Amsterdam, because in that same storm, there were hundreds and hundreds of vessels lost. This one survived to tell the tale. How miraculous is that? Amazing.
Okay, so all the odds were against the Pilgrims, okay? And just as they were getting out of England in that whole treasonous, accusation situation, okay? They get on this boat, they get on this ship, okay? And this Mayflower ship, it's nothing but a wine boat. It's not even really a ship that's designed to go across an ocean. It's basically just to deliver wine from France to England. So they go on this boat, and the perfect storm shows up, probably the biggest storm in 100 years. Hundreds and hundreds of vessels are lost at sea, except one.
The little wine boat.
The little wine boat.
That could.
that God protect, that could and did. Right. Okay? And so they had to have the hand of God protecting them amongst the storm. Okay? And so again, it gets better. Here we go.
The story is getting amazing. I mean, here's 100 ships get caught up in this storm and don't make it, but the ship with the Pilgrims on it makes it to Holland. They don't have their wives and their kids. They're hoping that they'll meet up with them again. It's not till a year later I learned that they actually got their wives and kids over to Holland with them. I couldn't get on a plane and go back to America now. I had to follow this trail. I bought a ticket and got on a ferry and took it across the channel to Holland so that I could see where they set up shop in Leiden and began their church service there under the leadership of their pastor, John Robinson.
The storm abated. This one survived to tell the tale. How miraculous is that?
Yeah, this is not the story that I heard growing up in school. Quiet little religious fuddy-duddies scurry out of England with their tail between their legs and come to America not knowing how to plant corn or fend for themselves. No, they actually planned to go somewhere where they could find spiritual freedom so that they could return to England and set their people free with what they were learning. And Holland was the place for that. There was a town called Leiden where they regrouped for 12 years as a congregation. In Leiden, I met with one of my good friends and the president of the World History Institute, Dr. Marshall Foster. What was life like for them once they got here?
It was tough. They couldn't get jobs because they weren't parts of the guilds. They had to put their children to work many times just to eat and to survive. Then they had to get their wives and children over because the king had kept them behind. And by the time they settled into Leiden in 1609, they were barely surviving. But you know what? They were free. And it was the only place they could have gone in all the world that was not under a tyrant who would kill them. If they went to France, tens of thousands were dying. If they would have gone over to Germany, millions were dying in the streets. If they went up to Scotland, 40,000 or more were dying. Even ministers, by the thousands, were being persecuted and butchered. And so, of all the places in the world that they could have gone that year, that was the one place they could be free, and they could worship God, and they could prepare themselves for the future. Equally important to them was their love of their England that they left behind. It was under the divine right tyrant, King James, and they wanted to bring them the liberty of the gospel. And so they set up a printing press in William Brewster's home. And that press was the internet of the day. It was the way to go around the censorship of the king and to get the truth of the gospel to the people of England and Scotland. And so they produced over 15 books and then put them in kegs and sent them in ships secretly over to England and Scotland, and it went all over the country. Well, James was really excited about that. In fact, he spent the next year and a half tracking this down, and finally he found out that it was the Pilgrim Press in Leiden that had published these books. The troops came in, broke down the printing press, and took the seal of the King of England and sealed the home so no one could live there. And that was the end of their adventure in printing. And Bradford tells us, he said, they came to propagate the gospel of Christ, or the kingdom of Christ, to the remotest parts of the world. Yea, they could be but stepping stones for the promotion of so great a work. Now here's a vision. Here's a group of people who are losers. They escape. They now are having to leave. They've got no support. They've got no money. They have all kinds of problems, and yet they're willing to escape to a wilderness, and yet they've got this vision, a generational vision, that they can lay their lives down in this wilderness and literally put their faces down in the mud and have their children walk on their back to a better day. That's a generational perspective. In fact, it was so true of them that at the end of Bradford's life, he says that this one small light that we have kindled here in Plymouth has shined to our entire nation. So it happened. 400 years later, the liberty that the world now enjoys is because these people had the faith to lay their lives down in the wilderness 400 years ago.
Okay, so that's as much of the movie that I'm going to show. I encourage everybody to watch the documentary, because this part and what was just shown in the documentary in that portion, they had to regroup for 13 years. The Pilgrims had to regroup for 13 years before they even made the journey over to America. They were beaten. They were downtrodden. Why am I saying all this? Somebody asked a question. What is an example of the case that was hard to achieve the American dream? As you continue to watch this documentary, the Pilgrims had the hardest, most treacherous road to hoe. Okay, as he just said, the Pilgrims were willing to lay their faces in the mud and let their children walk on their backs to a freedom in a better day, in a more prosperous day. That's a winner. That's when it's hard. Are you willing to go there?
Put your mud in the face.
You don't
face in the mud.
We don't even have to. We have it so easy.
Yeah.
We have it so easy. And when people quit, I'm like, you are such a loser.
You're right.
You are you are weak. Yeah. You're a wimp.
Pitiful.
You have no clue what hardship is. You have no persecution, treachery. The Pilgrims, they had it worse than anybody in history. Ministers getting butchered by the thousands, okay? Because the gospel had been translated into English.
Right.
It began setting people free. And what did the controllers do?
They get mad.
They got mad and they started killing people, okay? Because they did not want to lose control.
Right.
Okay? That's the very thing. That was the spark for the fuel that caused these Puritan Christians, okay, they got a glimpse of freedom,
right,
of knowledge, of liberty. Once they got that from the true gospel, they had to go find a land where they could live with freedom and liberty. So we're not going to watch any more of the documentary there, but the rest of the story, which is amazing, continues on from there. And they talk about the treacherous path that they had, you know, going across the Atlantic and the things that happened when they landed in Plymouth. Out of 102 people that got on the boat, only 47 survived.
Yeah.
Between the trip there and the first winter, they went from 102 to 47. Less than half of the Pilgrims who made the journey to America survived to see the Promised Land. what is an example of a hard case? That's my example of a hard case. And each and every one of us needs to ask the question, are we prepared to endure the hardship required to live the dream? And I call it hardship, but I mean, that's kind of overstating it because it's so easy now.
Right.
I don't even know what hardship is. I'll be the first to admit I have no idea what hardship is because the Pilgrims knew what hardship was.
I mean, well, just to, we were speaking earlier, just to talk about the present day, the thing just happened in New York City. Now, don't get me wrong. Okay, I'm all for, people getting out of hardship. I'm all for people finding a new way, their path, their journey. But the U.S. of A. do more for people that come out of hardship from a different place than the people that's in the hardship in their own country. So I understand and respect the people that take that trip. In most of them third world countries, and they take that boat ride. It's literally a boat ride or a what do you call it, a border crossing, which is a long travel, thousands of miles that we've been seeing, how long these lines are with the people on the border, and that's a hardship. They're getting away from, desperation, murder, and everything else.
Right. What we take for granted, they're willing to die for.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it boils down to all that is that we cannot take for granted the American dream, the benefits and the opportunities and the liberty and the freedom that we have here. And that's not even speaking about what's coming in 2024. True liberty and true freedom is returning in 2024 to an extent that is never even thought possible. And we're going to get into more of that later. But that's my example of hard.
And that's a hard one.
That's a hard one. It doesn't get any harder than that from what I can see.
Most people are not going to do that. They're not going to deal with it. They're going to go down, like you said, with the ship. They're going down with the ship.
So, Hakeem Manuel from Philadelphia, who asked that question, that's your answer. I hope you enjoyed it. And right now, that wraps up episode number 12. I hope you enjoyed the show. So we will see you again soon. Thanks for tuning in.